This is not a high-budget AAA project that hundreds of developers worked on. This world-class game was built by a team of 11 people, which included only 4 artists. They worked around traditional game engine limitations to deliver some of the most visually dense environments in modern games. You might have heard of No Law that was revealed at the latest State of Unreal 2026. Today, we are covering their previous game, the Ascent. The most impressive thing about the Ascent by Neon Giant is how they established their asset pipeline. Every vehicle, industrial wall, mechanical prop, and about 80% of hard surface assets in this game are using the exact same shader. That's right. One 4K texture set is taking care of most of the game's assets. In a standard pipeline, this would cause a big issue: too much repetition, even in the context of sci-fi panels and machines. In this video, we will explore the shader optimization trick from Tor Frick and see how they solve the issue of repetition. With a team of 4 artists, they couldn't rely on traditional methods of creating a high poly, baking it onto a low poly using Substance Painter or Marmoset, and then sending all that in the game engine. With the amount of assets that the game demanded, the texture memory budget would have been too high, and the small team could not realistically produce a game of this scale. Their brilliant solution was to use a hybrid asset pipeline that combined trim sheets with pre-baked microgeometry and using weighted normals on the 3D models. But even with the texture memory budget under control, how did they populate such a dense sci-fi world environment? That's where tech art and procedural content creation comes into play. By leveraging Houdini, the team created several custom tools that eliminated the need for manual set dressing for most environments. From creating rooms, adding debris, cables, and decals to randomizing the modules, allowing for optimal placement of assets, creating signs and vistas structures, these tools are what made this game possible. And one of the optimization secrets that made the game look so good at such a low cost can be found in their lighting approach. The use of reflection probes that they use to basically paint the lighting in their world is a clever trick, but even better, they used a light map trick that helped them reduce their draw calls by 10%. Now that's some next level optimization. More on that later in the video. So let's start with probably the most impressive technical achievement of this game, their shader workflow. For a small team of 11 people from Sweden working for 4 years that counted only 4 artists and no concept artist, they were in for a challenge. The game was made using Unreal Engine 4, by the way. Let's mention that the Ascent is Neon Giant's first game, so they didn't have any systems in place, but the team was made up of AAA veterans, so they assessed their situation with clarity. They wanted a dark, greedy sci-fi world reminiscent of Blade Runner, but had to consider the feasibility of the project. Let's take this image from the GDC talk in 2022 by Tor Frick to illustrate the genius of their approach. They couldn't use masks to add dirt and grime because that would involve creating thousands of textures, and this was out of the question. So this is what they did. They used the UV sets of the meshes and used the UDIM approach, which is basically offsetting the UVs, and use that as a mask, so that allowed them to have different colors without adding any textures. Here, we can see this with using only a few types of materials they needed for the game: bare or painted metal or plastic. Now, to make it look like authored texturing, they used several layers. First, since the main texture set is a trim sheet, they could add some texture masks that could drive dirt and wear and tear around bolts and other parts where it would logically form. That would be the base pass. What was missing was contextual dirt that would use the shape of the asset. Secondly, they used vertex colors. By baking the ambient occlusion, they used that to drive dirt, rust, and wear and tear, which helped give a more believable look and feel. Thirdly, they baked an ambient occlusion mask when they baked the lighting and used it to drive the general dirt and grime that would be found around and between the assets in the world. This way, they could manage to have all of that done without any manual authoring, which is very impressive. Additionally, they used a secondary UV set and used the same UDIM approach to use as a mask for the decals and the emissive surfaces. To get a good sense of how brilliant this workflow is, Here is an example shown in the GDC talk. Let's look at this image from the slums. This environment is using exactly the same textures, materials, and assets as this one, the much cleaner lab. So that's the brilliant idea behind their whole shader pipeline, pushing very high quality with a very low quantity of textures and materials and managing a very high rate of reusability. So working on such an ambitious project forced the team to plan their asset pipeline very carefully. They needed to design a fast content pipeline to work on a large-scale game with a very high asset density. They clearly identified what could not work. Traditional high poly to low poly using baking normal maps workflow, tiling materials and decals, trim sheets, one set of baked assets and one set of trim sheets, that could have kind of worked, but then they would have needed two materials for many assets, so that too was not going to work. Their solution? Split between a trim sheet and baked pieces. Note that they left some space for the baked pieces, thinking they would surely need many more, but at the end they didn't. They found a way to reuse what they had here to create about 80% of the game's hard surface assets. That meant that they had to cut corners and accept that some assets would not look very detailed from up close. But good news, the camera view is not very close to most assets in the game. So by making heavy use of weighted normals and only using low poly geometry, they could get away with this method. Here, outlined in blue, is the assets using that one shader. Of course, they used mesh decals to add variations. To further optimize their shader workflow, they limited their options at 3 colors and 3 metal types. We can see here in Modo their tagging system, which would then pre-visualize the results straight in the DCC, and they used the preset vertex color bake that gets sent in Unreal Engine 4. They were below 100 megabytes on world textures for the memory budget, with one 4K texture. That left space for everything else and still have a very lean build. Since so many assets are sharing the same master material shader, they could manage the art direction by adjusting a few sliders, and the whole environment of the game would get the same amount of dirt and wear and tear. That was an additional benefit of their pipeline. They didn't actually plan this, but it was a byproduct of their extreme optimization effort. All of the tricks helped the team go beyond what they expected, creating over 8,000 assets, which translates roughly to 3 finished assets per day per artist during the production, like Torfrick mentioned during the GDC talk. I would like to mention that my upcoming course will cover topics like shader optimization and proper shader library management for AA, AAA productions. Stay tuned for the upcoming announcement. This is a view of the whole world of the Ascent. And this is how each room can be dense. So with such a rich world to create and put together, and with such a small team, they needed to work smart and leverage the best tools of procedural creation, namely Houdini. From the senior technical artist Magnus Larsson, here are a few tools that made this huge task possible. First, we have the Room Maker tool. So environment artists build modular kits in power of 2 sizes and with a strict height value. The tool created in Houdini, which was integrated in Unreal Engine 4, worked like a blueprint volume with exposed values that could work in additive or subtractive mode. It can then load the modular pieces from the library and assemble whole rooms within seconds. Advanced features such as adding debris, cables, decals, windows, add-on meshes were also included in this. We can see here that the tool can work with several presets. We can see here that this tool was not only used for rooms actually. On this picture, all the outline walls and rails were created using this wonderful tool. If you're learning from these videos but are still struggling to put everything together into a full environment, that's exactly why I built my full course. You'll build the entire scene step by step in real time, understanding composition, scale, materials, and lighting, so you can apply the same process to your own worlds. These environments were created by students using the same workflow you will learn here. It's designed for artists who already know the basics and want to create a professional portfolio work, not just isolated studies. This isn't about learning tools, it's about learning how professionals build environments. If that's where you're trying to get to, you can check the link in the description. Another great tool shared by the same artist is the Vista House Maker. It is reusing several assets from the Room Maker tool and presents many options that can be saving a ton of time for the artists in charge of set dressing the non-playable spaces. Most people think of vistas as very far away areas that we can barely see. That would be called the far or distant vistas. You also have the medium and the close vistas, which are right outside of the playable area and cannot be filled with very low poly or low resolution assets and textures. We have to mention their tool for decals. While pretty simple, we can be sure this also is an absolute must for this production. Then we have the sign generator tool that could create signs from either text or image input. It could be set up with different vertex color setup that drives shader for blinking sign. Again, a must for cyberpunk game that relies on a lot of emissive signs. A game like this will need several specific things. Pipes is a major part of every sci-fi game. The Pipe Maker tool is a very intuitive tool that uses a spline to draw the pipes in the environment. The Pipe Set Generator is the second tool that helps artists in their work on pipes. It generates a complete set of 34 pipes modules that is linked to the Pipe Maker inside Unreal Engine. The artist could select the file they wanted from a defined folder. UVs, occlusion vertex color to drive the material is generated at this stage. Everything could be changed at any point in time. What a great tool. We are also very lucky that the artist published his documentation on ArtStation. I will add all the links in the description for those who would like to take a closer look. Equally impressive is the cable tools. Just like for the pipes, this game needed a lot of cables everywhere, so placing them manually made no sense. The first tool is the plain cable tool. It was used for generating hanging cables and featured two modes, one simulated mode and one my own made-up math mode, which generates cables much faster. The artist could define additional hanging planes to easily direct the look and fit the cables. There are options to add the sub-cables. These are the ones twisting around larger main cables. The second tool is the Cable Floor tool. This was used for generating cables on floors and draped over any selected geometry inside Unreal Engine by drawing a spline. A toggle, hold, and start help connecting the assets on the spline to surrounding geometry, allowing it to make it look connected to machinery. Both tools uses a custom mesh generation, which based on normalized radius apply a minimum to maximum number of sides for easy polygon optimization. Vertex coloring and UVs are generated to drive the material. We are really blessed by this artist and this studio for sharing so much information about their pipeline. Now, still from the same artist, the Environment Destruction tool. The two goals of the team were to make it really fast to author and really cheap to render. For the pillars, instead of having actual destruction, they cheated. Several Houdini digital assets are generating 8-directional baked simulations and proper import Python commands, which a blueprint then plays the correct animation based on the player location from the destruction. So they made it look like their destruction system was using simulation and was reacting to what the players were doing, but it's actually all pre-planned and triggered. It's a great trick. I'm happy to introduce a new partner of the channel, Bundle Foundry. You can get several tutorials for a very good price here. The current bundle that is still available is called Become a 3D Artist Mega Tutorial Bundle. Several bundles just launched. You want to check this out. Check out the price also. This is great value. This is a great opportunity to level up your skills at a great price. Links to the bundles will be in the description. There are many other tools created using Houdini that are shared on the artist's ArtStation portfolio. One important aspect when working on a cyberpunk environment is screens and holograms and those kind of things. The Ascent is no exception, and there was a tool developed for this called the COPS Channel to Pick an Unreal Comp material. This workflow would generate composition tracks with Houdini's 2D editor that an Unreal Engine material can playback. This was used to populate the world with a large amount of animated displays. I will let you discover the other tools on the artist's page. We have covered here the most important ones for this production. For the lighting, they used a hybrid mix of static and dynamic. They used very large static lights that they placed manually to light general areas. And in the environments, they used a lot of static lighting with light maps. But the trick to make it look good is the use of reflection probes. Given the camera angle, they couldn't use the probes the regular way. Because this is not first or third person perspective, in top-down, they had the luxury of deciding where they wanted to add probes, like over puddles of water or near nice reflective material. Those reflection probes are very expensive, up to 1 megabyte of memory each. But again, because the camera is far away from the surfaces, they could lower the resolution to 64 by 64 cube maps, and they went all in adding those everywhere they needed, but limiting the number at 341 at any time. Then we have the most clever trick of optimization from this game, the light maps trick. The default resolution for light maps in Unreal Engine 4 was 1K. By increasing it to 2K, the devs saved 10% of draw calls in the game. Here is the explanation. When increasing the resolution of a light map in Unreal Engine, it actually does not increase the resolution. It packs more assets into the texture. And the automatic instancing setting of Unreal Engine works this way. It will only work if it's the same mesh, same material, and the same light map. So by increasing the resolution of the light maps, the system automatically auto-instanced more assets. But that also meant that they needed more light maps, which worked for them because they didn't use a lot of textures. So they gave us a clear idea. That increased the cost in memory by around 50 megabytes on Xbox One, and that allowed them to cut the draw calls by 10%. So that was really worth it. Another major thing about the lighting is the volumetric light. They wanted to have lots of volumetric lights to make the game look like Blade Runner, but those are really expensive. So they used bake volumetric lighting and used the volumetric light maps density volumes to optimize all that, which helped, but still took a huge chunk of memory. So their brilliant trick was to add an extra MIP to the volumetric light grid by simply adding a variable, which allowed them to go from 150 to 40 megabytes. That was genius. Another great optimization trick that they did with lighting was placing a distance-based fading on all the lights, which is by Torfric's admission, the biggest optimization pass they did in the game. And then, they created a tool that would manage shadow casting by platform, which you cannot do in the standard version of Unreal Engine. But they had shadows on everything for the next-gen platforms and shadows on almost nothing for the previous gen of platforms, or the current gen at the time of release in 2021. The analysis of this game brings an interesting perspective that will help school graduates and junior artists better understand the huge difference between school and working in the industry. Before working for a studio on a professional production, artists are trained to obsess over tiny details and can spend unreasonable amount of time on parts that end up being not very important. The reality of the industry is often rooted in constraints, very challenging budgets, and grand ambitions. Working in the industry requires artists, and every dev for that matter, to be able to completely change their perspective and accept and embrace a very different approach than what they are comfortable with. From working in Unreal Engine 5 using all the latest tech, Nanite, Lumen, Megalights, MetaHumans, etc., without much worries about performance and optimization, because it doesn't really matter at this level, to joining a studio working with a very old in-house game engine that can be very janky, ask anyone in pretty much any studio, using a DCC version from 5 years ago or more, same for Substance Painter and Designer, ZBrush, or Marmoset. You might not have all the latest tools from the third-party supplier. You might have some awesome tools created in-house that can help the specific needs of the game you're working on though. But you have to deal with the instability, the absence of documentation altogether in some cases, and you now rely on your communication skills to get the information on how to do things without asking 10 questions every hour to more experienced artists who are busy. My goal with these videos is to help aspiring game artists and devs to understand what is not taught in schools, and that anyone who pays attention can use to make them stand out. Most of the videos on this channel are trying to point out at the systemic nature of game development, and anyone who are not showing that they know about these things, I'm trying to show how experienced artists are showing how systems are built in game, not just assets. Anyone can find plenty of content on how to make assets the right way. That's like the prerequisite, but it's not enough. Moving forward, with everything going on in the game industry in the West, especially in America, if you focus on asset creation, you might be able to find work in outsourcing studios, which is an honorable line of work. But if you want to be part of the actual game development, working at the next level, which is creating or managing the various systems that are needed to create a game, is what you want to focus on. So my advice would be to invest some of your time in learning actual technical constraints, like build your beautiful environment with realistic targets of number of assets, so you will have to be creative and reuse many. Be mindful of your texture size. 4K is not adding anything most of the time. Not every texture map has to be of the same resolution. You can have an albedo and normal map of 2K, and your roughness can be 1K if there's not so much going on for this material. So, the texture memory budget is important, and the optimization of your shaders too. That will be part of my upcoming course that I will announce soon. In the meantime, stay positive, keep on learning, and be creative. I'm also offering a AAA portfolio checklist that might help you figure out what's important for employers when applying for a job. The link is in the description. And a quick thank you to the members supporting the channel. Your support helps make these videos possible.